Welcome back everyone to another episode of Arkham Horror The Complete Guide, a complete tutorial for all things Arkham Horror the card game. In last episode we discussed the player phase. Now it's worth noting that there are 4 phases of Arkham Horror the card game. And in a lot of cardboard games there are phases. These are used to sort of divide up the actions so you can process how the turn goes evenly. Now in Arkham Horror there is the Mythos phase, the player phase, the enemy phase, and the Upkeep phase. So these phases are these new ones. The player phase we discussed last episode. The player phase is where you do your player actions in turn. You'll do 3 actions per turn: investigate, play assets, fight, engage enemies, and so forth. Next, we have the enemy phase. That's where enemies will sort of move and deal damage to the player they're engaged with. The upkeep phase, or the ready phase, is where all the cards that are exhausted ready up. You get a fresh resource and draw an extra card. And the Mythos phase is where you add a doom to the agenda, which progresses the story a little bit, and you draw a card from the encounter deck, made from the encounter symbols we discussed in the first video. That'll be adding enemies to the game area, treacheries, might do certain tests and such. Now the game does start with the investigation phase, or the player phase. It skips the Mythos phase during the first round. It's because it's kind of hard to instantly have an encounter card and put them in the agenda. It'd be too tough. I don't know why it's worded that way, it just is. We'll explain how that Mythos phase works in the next video. But for now, we are on the enemy phase. This episode is going to be all about enemies and how enemies work. So I've gathered cards from the gathering set, and some other sets. It isn't an actual scenario, I've just used locations as a sort of blueprint so I can teach how the enemies move, how they attack. I've got my assets down here, so just see what I've got so far. So using the Schizo tool, you can see he has pretty well on his stats, pretty low willpower, but his combat and evade are kind of decent. He has 8 health, 6 sanity. During my turn, I spend 2 resources. I can take an additional action. So I can basically spend 2 resources and have an extra action. Alistair pull, I get +2 and gain 2 resources. So I've got full health. I've got 4 resources down here. So I've got some cards in my hand. So we've got the assets down here. We have Cat Burglar. So this is an asset. It's an ally. Also, you have 1 ally per slot. Gives you +1. So technically, I actually have 5 of the evade. These stack up. So I've got 5 on my evade. And I can, as an action, by the action icon there, I can exhaust Cat Burglar, disengage from each enemy engaged with you, and move to get in location. This attack does not provoke a tax opportunity. I'll explain how tax opportunity work in a second. So basically, I can, as an action, I can exhaust him and evade from each enemy and move to a location. I also have a copy of Hard Knocks. There's a lot of cards like this. This is the free action window. It doesn't cost an action, so I can do this multiple times. I can spend a resource, get +1 combat or +1 evade for a skill test I'm performing. I've got the 41 Derringer. It's a pistol. It uses 3 ammo and using dice for the ammo counters. So spend an ammo, that'll knock the counter down. A fight, so I do a 5 keyword, so they're bold keyword in the action. Get +2 for this attack. If I succeed by at least 2 or more, that's with the modifier skill tokens, it does an extra +1 damage. So when the counters run out of this, it will be discarded. And also I have the fight asset. Obviously I've got 2 slots in my hand. So as an action, I can fight, +1 to the attack for the combat, or I can discard the knife and get +2 and do extra 1 damage. So cards in my hand, I do have a copy of Lone Wolf, which is just for gaining resources and assets. Another copy of the knife, and I have 3 skill cards. As I said in my previous video, skill cards are only played during skill tests with a symbol. These you can play on the board as an asset, or you can use as a skill icon without paying the resource to add these symbols to your skill test. So let's put it this way: we've done the investigation phase, we've gained clues, we've moved, we've played assets, and now it's time for the enemy phase. So there's 2 steps to enemy phase. As you can see here, enemies with the hunter keyword move towards the nearest investigator, and then each engaged enemy attacks if able. So first of all, you'd always check for the hunter keyword. Now, I discussed before, there's quite a lot of keywords in Arkham Horror, but the most important one of the enemies to look out for is the hunter keyword, which you can see here. This card has the hunter keyword, this card has no keywords. That's the bold traits, that's flavor text, we don't need to look at that. So, this has the hunter keyword. So first things first, enemy phase, any card with the hunter keyword will move. They move 1 space towards the nearest investigator. The enemies move like you would move. So you look at the enemies, you look at what investigator is closest by, and you think, can the enemy move there? For instance, The location is connected with red. This location here, red. So the enemy will move. If I was at a location that was a little bit farther away, he would move one space, and next turn a space closer. If I was at a location where he couldn't move, if I was at the study with yellow, there's no yellow there, and there's no real way of him getting there, he would not move. So it's important to realise that enemies would move as a player would move. They move gradually towards the nearest investigator, taking little spaces as they can. Don't do massive detours, go as quickly as you can to that location. If they can't get there, if there's no possible routes, there's no other alternate routes, the enemy will not move. So, as I was there. So obviously, this enemy has a hunter, he'll instantly move to here. And this enemy is engaged with me. Now, engaged means the enemy is in my threat area. That means it is engaged. Think of it as locked in battle. It's locked in a battle with me. So, that is my enemy engaged with me. So, that's moved. Next step is the enemy attacks. So, any enemy that's engaged with me, either from the hunter keyword or from the previous round, will attack me. So, this indicates this enemy will deal 1 damage off my health. If I had this enemy, it would take 1 damage and 1 sanity, as you can see there. If I had both, I'd lose 2 damage and 1 sanity. So let's say the enemy has moved. He's moved there. That's in my threat area. Okay, next up, let's say we've gone through the other round, back to another turn. Now on my turn, there's a term called attack of opportunity. So it's important to note that if there's a ready enemy, that means the enemy is not exhausted, at a location investigator, it'll be immediately engaged with that investigator. So it's important to know that there can never be a ready enemy and a ready investigator at a location. If there's anything like that, they would immediately engage. If I move to here, I'll be immediately engaged. I can't move and move away. I can't move and then instantly do an action. It will immediately engage unless it is exhausted. It's important to note there can never be a ready enemy and ready investigator. They will always engage. In the case of there's 2 investigators at a location, you can always use the prey instructions to see who it's going to be. Now, the prey is usually used when it's spawned from the encounter deck to see who it's going to spawn with, but we'll explain that in a second. See here it says prey lowest agility. So lowest agility will be engaged first, there'll be a priority. We'll show how that works in a second. So, say I'm engaged this enemy. I've gone through the Mythos phase, Upkeep phase, I'm back on my turn now. Now, attack of opportunity. Now, what this means is you're engaged with the enemy, and if you do any other action other than to fight, evade, parlay, or resign, that means the enemy will make an immediate attack against you. It's sort of like the enemy, think of the enemy as locked in a battle with you. It's locked in a sort of deadly one-on-one conflict. If you try and play a card or gain a resource or do an action that isn't directly involving that enemy, it's going to strike you like a sort of sneaky attack. You have to deal with the enemy or find a way around it. Now, you can do stuff. It will do the attack immediately after. So I could, for instance, play the knife. Well, I couldn't play a knife. I could play a lone wolf. I'd play it, it'd be fine, cast a resource, but as soon as that card is played, you'll immediately get a free attack, and we don't want that. Of course, it's some situations you might have to get a weapon down or an item to evade, but certain enemies were stronger and have higher attack. It's important to watch out for the enemies. Enemies in this game can be quite tricky. The enemies I've got here are quite weak. Their health is quite weak, they do low damage, but other enemies in the game are extremely tough. So, we've done that. So, we have an enemy here. How to handle an enemy you're engaged with. So first of all, like I said last game, I've got a spawn of rats here. I could do multiple things here. I could easily kill the rat. I've got the 41 Derringer. I could use a skill card, overpower, or I could evade. Let's say I want to evade. Last video we talked about attacking the rat. We killed the rat with attack. This time, even though I've got quite a lot of strength, I've got quite a lot of evade. I've got 4, 5 off the cat burglar. So I'm going to do an evade test. So obviously, as I said, if you fight or evade, no attack is made. So I'm going to evade. I'm going to use this. I mean, I could just exhaust Cat Burglar. I could exhaust this, disengage, and move away from the enemy to a protected location. The enemy is still there and ready. So if I move back, it will engage again. Investigator, move there, it will engage. Enemy phase, it will use Hunter keyword and move along. So let's say I want to evade. Let's say I play I've got 5, I'm going to play my own dexterity to give me +2, so I've actually got 7 total to my evade skill. You then pull from the Chaos Token bag, modify your skill, so 0, it's still 7. 7 is way more than 3. When you evade an enemy, always remember, the enemy exhausts. And it exhausts and it stays at the location you currently were. So now I'm free to move, I can play a card, I can do what I want. I could even stay there if I wanted to. It's an important tactic in Arkham Horror is to evading enemies is more useful than just evading the enemy and running away. It's useful for fighting too and handling. And this is why, because the enemy phase happens before the upkeep phase. Now remember that's important. So the enemies will only move and attack if they are ready. So if I evade this enemy, and even if I was there, say I was there, enemy phases happen. This guy doesn't move, hasn't got a hunter. He's not ready, he can't move. Basically, he's exhausted. Think of him as being stunned or knocked over or temporarily dazed. Nothing happens. Now the upkeep phase, he readies up. And I pass, no, nothing happens. Let's say I was still here. Test worked, I evaded the enemy. I waited around. I need some clues from there. I wanted to stay at this location for some reason. I don't know what it could be. So enemy phase happens, doesn't attack because he's not ready. He's exhausted, he's used up, he's temporarily unavailable. Then the upkeep phase, raise up. Even though he's ready, the enemy turn has passed. He's had his chance to attack, his turn has passed. Now I'm safe. So you can see why evading enemies, even when you're fighting an enemy, is useful. Say I had a big enemy with a lot of health. For instance, say I had the Relentless Dark Young card with me. So it has a few options here. So you can see here it has the Prey icon, which is a spawn indicator, which I'll explain in a second. And it also says at the end of the round, heal 2 damage from Relentless Dark Young. So it's quite a tough enemy. It's got 5 health, 4 fights, only a lot of damage to kill it, and 2 evade. So say I had this enemy here and I wanted to try and stop this enemy and kill it. I could attack it 3 times. I could maybe kill it. Say I attacked it twice and I thought, I don't know if I can quite kill this. To avoid it damaging me, I could always evade it. Do the upkeep phase, ready up, and then attack again. Basically, it's sort of like a dance, like you fight, stun it, knock it down, ready up again, fight again. So being evading is useful in many common situations. So that's the enemy phase mostly discussed. There are a few other keywords with the enemy phase. There's stuff such as aloof. Aloof enemies, think of aloof enemies as sort of neutral. They don't engage investigators on their own accord. You cannot attack them unless you engage with it, certain effects. You can damage them with sort of other items, such as assets, but they will not engage you. There is the keyword massive, which is when the enemy is massive, it's engaged with all investigators at the location. They all engage at the same time. And another common keyword is retaliate. Now, retaliate means if you fail a skill test when you attack the enemy, they will attack you back. So that's the enemy phase done. The upkeep phase is such a simple phase to discuss. It's so easy. It's just basically you ready up all your character mini cards when you flipped over, back to the front. Ready all exhausted cards, so all enemies, all your cards down here. F is ready up to ready to go. You'll get a new resource and you'll also draw an extra card. And that's it for the enemy and upkeep phase. Now in Arkham Horror there are multiple ways of dealing with enemies. Enemies will come from the encounter deck, they'll come from certain card effects as the act progresses and spawn that spawn with you, with someone else. And it's really important to know when to fight, to run, and what to do with enemies. Sometimes in Arkham Horror you completely ignore enemies. This ghoul minion up here, if I didn't need to move to this location, I could really ignore the ghoul minion. He doesn't do he's no bother to me, he's a pretty weak enemy. I could kill if I wanted to, but I'm wasting actions. And time is the essence in Arkham Horror. You don't want to waste too much time just trying to pick off enemies when you don't need to. Some enemies, of course, especially ones with a hunter, or big enemies, or ones that are a threat or blocking a location, of course, handle them if you need to. But as I said before, it's always a knowledge to know when to fight or flee. And that's it for this quick video on the enemy phase and the upkeep phase. If you have any questions or anything you want to add, leave a comment down below. Like and subscribe, I'd appreciate that. And next lesson we'll discuss the Mythos phase and how to advance the act and agenda. Thanks for watching.